The Chinese Grand Prix has been called off yet again for the 2023 season, and we know that Formula 1 bosses are chasing a replacement to keep the calendar at 24 races. China was named on the initial calendar but was widely considered to be extremely unlikely, and F1 has finally admitted it will not happen, because of the issues around hosting the event like normal due to the country's ongoing COVID problem. Even though there is already one standout candidate that is most likely to join the 2023 calendar in China's place, F1's keen to play up the fact that more options exist, and rightly so, because there are loads of fun candidates out there. F1 is likely to have a very small shortlist, but a range of circuits have been temporary options during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we think there are loads more viable ones. F1 just has to be willing to get a bit more creative and maybe sacrifice a few $1 million as well. So we're here to run through 10 ways to replace the Chinese Grand Prix. If you like our list, then please leave us a thumbs up, subscribe and turn on the notifications bell to show our channel even more love, and of course let us know in the comments which track you'd like to see replace Shanghai, and if there's anything you reckon we should have included here. Let's start with an option that probably isn't going to be suggested outside of this video: Adelaide, F1's original home for the Australian Grand Prix. Australian fans had to sit through no race at all in 2020 and 2021, so this would be a nice reward for them, as well as a throwback to a classic venue, as the circuit still exists with a shortened layout, and the local council in Adelaide was tentatively interested in reviving the race a few years ago. But there's one thing that stood out about Adelaide when we were thinking of potential options, and it's in the interest of sustainability, a powerful buzzword in Formula 1. An Aussie doubleheader would give some credibility to the schedule, as frankly it is ridiculous for F1 to travel all the way to Melbourne for a one-off without even having an Asian or Middle Eastern race to pair it with. Whenever the subject of a potential replacement race comes up in F1, Sepang is always a popular shout, and I will always die on the Malaysian Grand Prix hill. The race hasn't been held since 2017 because crowd numbers weren't considered good enough compared to the rising cost of hosting the event. So it's never actually done a deal in the Liberty Media era, but in just a few years several F1 races have gone from struggling to selling out tickets. The championship's popularity has never been greater, so a Malaysian Grand Prix could be a very different story in 2023, and Sepang is a mega track which should still be hosting F1. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be much appetite from circuit bosses to bring F1 back, at least in the short term, largely thanks to the economic impact of the pandemic. F1 doesn't need to convince countries to hold a race given demand is massive at the moment, but this would be a brilliant one to change its tactic for to try to tempt back into the fold. The Turkish Grand Prix at Istanbul returned twice in 2 COVID-hit seasons and can be presumed to be a keen candidate. It was very interested in striking a long-term deal with F1 beyond the last of those 2 races in 2021. However, while the circuit was once something of a modern classic, its years of minimal use have taken their toll, and the infrastructure isn't really viewed as F1 level anymore. But it remains a good solution if F1 finds itself in a hole, could benefit from some state funding, and is more realistic than some others that we're suggesting here. Speaking of which, we're back to a suggestion that might seem pie in the sky for a moment, but hear us out. We understand that F1 has a lot of interest in racing in Seoul, and that the South Korean capital is just as interested in welcoming the championship. Not on the track that hosted the Formula E season finale, but a new one, potentially a street race downtown. A new race, even a street track, isn't going to be ready by April 2023, and maybe not even later in the year. So a like-for-like China 2023 replacement probably isn't possible. But F1's trying to rebuild its presence in Asia after the COVID hit years, and South Korea is a great candidate for F1 to prioritise in the East longer term. There would be worse announcements than to hear F1 is shooting for the moon with Seoul and seeing what's possible, whether that's for 2023 or, much more realistically, beyond. F1 is slowly evolving the spread of its calendar, and that means European races are falling away. While the money coming in from the Middle East and the growth opportunities seen in the US and Asia appeal to F1, championship bosses know that its spiritual heartland is important. The German market is particularly coveted, so the decline of its presence has been regrettable to F1. With Sebastian Vettel and Mick Schumacher leaving the grid at the same time, Germany's relevance has been further depleted, even with Nico Hülkenberg returning. F1's not thrilled about that, especially as it wants to tap into German interest with Audi joining in 2026 and Porsche still interested. So why not put their money where their mouth is and try to bring back the German Grand Prix? While neither Hockenheim nor Nürburgring are what they once were, they are circuits rooted in history and have their own charm and challenges. Doing a one-off favourable deal for either of the circuits to come back in 2023 would be a very logical way of tapping into the German market and seeing if there's enough interest to revive the race full-time as part of F1's current boom. F1's wanted to add a race in South Africa for a few years now, and it looked as though this could happen as early as 2023 anyway. F1 CEO Stefano Domenicali even travelled to Kyalami earlier this year with the hope a deal could be struck for the race to be held in April. But negotiations dragged on without resolution, and it's believed that the promoters didn't convince F1 that the race could be guaranteed beyond just 1 year. It wouldn't work for F1 to celebrate the return of South Africa to the schedule only for it to disappear after one edition. But if it's brought in specifically as a standalone, it could act as a litmus test of the interest in the race and its viability, and be perfectly viable to frame as a one-off. This Tilcadrome outside Delhi only staged 3 Grand Prix, and none of them were classics, so in the mists of time many have forgotten that it was actually one of the better modern circuits to have appeared on the F1 calendar in the 21st century. Lewis Hamilton made comparisons to Spa, while Jenson Button suggested one section resembled Suzuka, recommendations from 2 great drivers that make this track worth re-evaluating. A return to India would be welcome, as there's a lot to like about it, and going back there would add lustre to the World Championship and in a country with a lot of F1 interest, not to mention offer a replacement for China that's still in Asia, even if it's not a like-for-like swap in the East. It's a shame F1 didn't take root when the Indian Grand Prix ran from 2011 to 2013, but the circuit has remained in use and will even be a slightly surprising part of the 2023 MotoGP calendar. That means it still has international aspirations and the means to fulfil them, so who's to say a second crack at F1 isn't possible. Telling you about the impending closure of the company that has promoted the French Grand Prix since 2018 isn't a particularly encouraging way to start this suggestion. France fell off the calendar for 2023 because it lacks massive financial support, has had logistical issues related to circuit access, and never really wowed drivers or fans. But Paul Ricard is a permanent and high quality facility, perfectly equipped to host F1, with recent experience of what's needed, and has had investment in improving the problems around the event. So as far as plug in and play host venues go, it is extremely practical. We've left the most rational suggestions until last. First, the most linked venue in recent weeks has been the Portimao circuit, which hosted Grand Prix in 2020 and 21. The Portugal promoter is believed to have the funding to pull off another Grand Prix and is widely considered to be the leading candidate. While it is certainly among the more photogenic F1 tracks of recent years, the racing hasn't exactly been vintage, as it's not really the kind of circuit F1 cars can race on. But it has the cash, the facilities are up to standard, it knows what modern F1 needs, and is just an all-round solid option for a relatively late notice stand-in. Some might argue that F1's best option to replace China is to do nothing. F1's bloated calendar is, after all, a very divisive topic. F1 is keen to replace China on the existing schedule because of the gap that would be left in the calendar if the slot stays empty. China was meant to hold a standalone event on April 16th between the races in Australia and Azerbaijan. One idea is not to replace China and bring Azerbaijan forward 1 week to April 23rd instead, which would also free the Baku race from a ridiculous back-to-back with Miami. It's understood that there was resistance to this from the Baku promoter, so the idea could be dead in the water. It would be a shame if so, as it would be a nice compromise that maintains the rhythm of the calendar, eradicates a rubbish doubleheader, and shows F1 is willing to forego extra races if necessary. If there is to be a replacement for China, or any subsequent change to the 2023 calendar, we're not likely to find out for sure until the new year. So until then, keep your suggestions coming and make sure you're subscribed to our channel and check out our website to keep up to date with that story and everything else that happens in the build up to the 2023 season.